On behalf of the University of Gour, Department of English, let me welcome you to another session of our online lecture series. Today, Dr. Pathik Roy from St. Joseph's College, Darjeeling, will discuss George Bernard Shaw's play, Saint John. Now, it's a matter of great pleasure and privilege for a teacher to introduce his own student to his other students. Now, I am really fortunate that once I had Pathik Roy as my student, and today he is a dear colleague and a younger brother of sorts. So I feel it really very, very a happy moment for me to be able to introduce him. He is a dynamic, up-and-coming teacher, very dedicated to his students. And today, I'm sure he will shed light on various aspects of Shaw's play, Saint John. So without further ado, let me hand over the reins of this class to Pathik. It's over to you, Pathik.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Indeed, it's quite a privilege to be here with all of you. I hope I am audible. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So, yes, it is indeed a very pleasurable and very privileged moment to be here with all of you. And the fact that the Department of English, Gour University, under the able leadership of Amit sir, they have taken up all the trouble to reach out to the students in various different ways. I think this is very commendable. And I feel good that I am able to, participate and do in my bit for this. So with that, I think we will move into what I am here for, because I suppose I am supposed to be with you for about an hour or a little more than an hour. I shall deal with Saint John. Okay, but of course, before I deal with Saint John as a particular play, I shall have to talk about Bernard Shaw and a few other things before I move into the play proper. You see, some ways I think George Bernard Shaw is a familiar name with you all, precisely because in your undergraduate days you had to do Arms and the Man, which was also written by George Bernard Shaw. And so I'm sure somehow or the other he is, at least his name is a little familiar to you. And this particular lecture is not in any way a substitute to your reading of the play. It is very important that you read the play, and in no way is my lecture going to substitute that. But in the next 1 hour or so, I shall try to provide a few pointers, and I shall try to provide a few, insights, which would perhaps help you in the course of reading the play and in making a meaning out of it. Of course, as I have said this, this is quite an obvious kind of a thing, that any text, all right, any literary text as such, is not limited to a single unitary meaning which is closed, all right? There are several meanings to a text, and the very fact that the meaning is not static, the very fact that the meaning is not or does not have a closure, makes it a literary piece of work. That's why perhaps that literary piece of work still survives. Otherwise, it would have been dated, we would have done with it, and it would have been over. But that is not the case. Now, this particular this lecture on Saint John is a kind of a attempt to explicate the play in view of certain ideas that George Bernard Shaw very publicly espoused, very publicly declared, all right, because as Kaufman, one of the critics of Shaw, says, and I quote him, he lived so long, wrote so much, talked so endlessly and so dismayingly well, embraced so many careers, and invented so many gospels, it is no wonder lesser men have sometimes tired of his relentless brilliance. Okay, so so we shall engage with the various ways with Saint John and explore the various ways in which this becomes a quintessentially successful Shavian play. All right. Hence let us start with the life of Bernard Shaw very quickly, because it's very important that you contextualize these things, all right, before you move into the play proper. Bernard Shaw was born in 1856. He was an Irish playwright. All right, he was born in Dublin in 1856, and he was born into what was known as the shabby genteel class. Okay, that is a middle class family which had pretensions of being very genteel, but they were extremely poor. Okay, and Bernard Shaw was a Protestant. So this is the kind of family background that Bernard Shaw came from. Middle class family of impoverished Protestants whose social aspirations were beyond their financial needs. And therefore, there was this kind of a certain degree of snobbery that ran, a certain degree of class consciousness that ran in the family, and that made them feel superior to the people around them. But at the same time, you see, his father was, using Bernard Shaw's own words, a failed corn merchant. And later on, he became bankrupt. And then he was alcoholic. He had a huge problem with alcohol. So all of this created a lot of problems. Okay, he was a failed corn merchant. Now, usually in such a family where the father is unable to shoulder the responsibilities of being a father, generally the whole thing is taken up by the mother. But in Shaw's case, his mother was a lady with a lot of talents in music and in singing. And therefore, after some years, when Shaw was 16, she moved away. And she went to London to explore her skills as a singer. So Shaw grew up without, let's say, the kind of parental protection that you find in normal households. And this instilled in him a huge sense of independence. Usually in these cases, there are these two opposites. The two opposites can happen. One, the person or the child is generally goes downhill. And the other extreme is also true, that the child fends for himself, realizes that he is alone, realizes that he has to run the extra mile, realizes that he has to work hard, and realizes that it is up to him to make a life for himself. For Shaw, I think that is what happened. He grew up with this sense of independence. And along with this sense of independence, I think what really happened was he started questioning everything. This is something you will find in his writings, that he refused to take anything for granted. Okay. he refused to take anything as given. There was always a kind of a questioning streak in him. And he would question institutions, he would question value systems, he would question the way in which, things came to be taken for granted. You would recall Arms in the Man, where Shaw questioned the institution of war, or Shaw questioned the institution of higher love. And Shaw has this uncanny capacity to take up things which are generally swept under the carpet, which people don't want to talk about, which people pretend that it doesn't exist. So he takes care of those things, he brings them up, and he allows a discussion to happen on stage. We'll come to that, right? Now, going back to his a very brief kind of of his life. So I said he grew up in such kind of a, at the best you would say it's a dysfunctional family. And so he had this somewhat unprotected childhood, which instilled this fierce sense of independence of spirit. And he scorned sentimentality, he scorned romance, and it enabled him to look upon the affairs of the world without any preconceived ideas. Without any preconceived ideas, with the feeling that he's got to seek out what is right without taking anything for granted. So as I said, Shaw's mother went off to London. Some years later, Shaw did not have, a kind of a formal schooling. So ultimately, he joined as a clerk in a real estate office, and he detested his job royally. He did not like it at all. And after some years, in around 1876, he followed his mother to London, and though his mother wasn't very happy to find him over there, but anyways, she bore up with him. And this was in 1876. But Shaw was, this was the period of intense intellectual exploration for him. He would spend most of his time in the British Museum, educating himself in art, in literature, in philosophy, in other disciplines of knowledge. So you see, a formal knowledge is not the only way of acquiring knowledge. Okay, Shaw was not in that sense formally educated, but then he was a stalwart in all these fields. Okay, he taught himself these things, and he joined a lot of these discussion groups. All right, and these discussion groups widened his horizon, his intellectual horizons, till in 1882 came a turning point in his intellectual life. In 1882, he went to listen to a lecture by Henry George. Now, Henry George is an American economist and the author of the book Progress and Poverty. Okay, and he was a socialist. And this particular lecture that he attended in 1882, this turned him into a socialist. This is a very important thing, that this turned him into a socialist. And you will find the impact of this particular thing all over in his works, including Saint John. Okay, I will talk about this idea of socialism when we do Saint John as well. All right. So, and then he went on to read Marx, and he went on to read, classical Marxist literature and things like that. But Henry George, the American economist, was a turning point in his intellectual evolution. And in 1884, he became a Fabian socialist. Indeed, he was one of the founding members. The other members included, Annie Besant and Sidney and Beatrice Webb and all these people who believed that there could be a growth of socialism through non-violent and constitutional means. This is very important, through non-violent and constitutional means. So He believed in socialism, but he believed that socialism was obtainable. It was possible to usher in an era of socialism through non-violent and through constitutional means. All right. So he became what is known as a Fabian socialist. He wrote a few essays later on. Now, if Henry George converted the Shaw to socialism, it was Henrik Ibsen. Ibsen is a Norwegian playwright, okay? And I don't know if you have heard about this, but one of the most famous plays for Ibsen, it is often there in the syllabus of a number of universities at the postgraduate level, The Doll's House, all right? So Henrik Ibsen was his theatrical mentor or his guru, okay? So, and Henrik Ibsen had always provoked this extreme kind of reaction. Either people were, greatly taken up by him, or people denounced him altogether, So he provoked this very, very extreme reactions all through his life. George Banachs suddenly found that Henrik Ibsen and his realist plays were the kind of plays that he would want to write, because he talks about, Henrik Ibsen was, of course, charged with obscenity, he was charged with immorality. These things were always there. But then George Banachs was fascinated by Ibsen. Okay, he was absolutely fascinated by Ibsen because, on one hand, it was iconoclastic, it was progressive, and it had a social message. Now, I'll just explain you what is iconoclastic. See, icon meaning an image, right? An image which is considered to be sacred, right? In Hindi, in Indian languages, we say an icon is a murti. Okay, so an iconoclast is someone who breaks down images. So, meaning to say, someone who questions and who is ready to break down established belief systems. So that's why, Henrik Ibsen was an iconoclast, and his disciple, George Banachs, was also an iconoclast. All right. He would take up issues which are looked upon as something that is granted and something that is eternally true. He would question them, he would break them down, he would refuse to subscribe to them. This is being iconoclastic. So we talked about Henry George, who converted him into socialism, and we also talked about Henrik Ibsen, who is a Norwegian playwright, and whose influence was great upon George Banachs. It actually, translated into the kind of aesthetics that he propounded later on. So, and later on in 1890, he gave a series of lectures, which was later published as the quintessence of Ibsenism, where he talks of social evolution, all right? He talks of social evolution as a process of replacement of outmoded institutions and value systems by new and more rational ones. So this was something that he always believed in, that we need to get rid of outmoded value systems. Okay, it's better we move into institutions which are more rational. Now, you see, George Banachs did not write plays right at the start. Okay, means he did not start his literary career by writing plays. You'll be surprised to know he actually wrote novels. Okay, and I don't think anybody read those novels except his own self. Okay. Even I haven't read any of his novels, and I haven't seen anyone reading any of his novels. So in a way, so his novels therefore were, a mammoth failure. But apart from that, he was a music critic for the Star. The Star is a journal of those days. He was an art critic also. And after his very, very dismal failure as a novelist, he moved into writing plays. So in 1892, he wrote The Widower's House. And this is the start of his career as a playwright. And slowly, he would pick up from there. As I told you, most of his plays are plays with social messages, okay? And Widower's House dealt with the problem of slums in London. Now, you see the interesting part, all right? Literature has always been for the elite and by the elite, okay? The voices of the underprivileged, the voices of, the slum dwellers, that was not something that literature really dealt with. Now, Shaw, for the first time, is talking about slum dwellers. He's talking about their problems. Like in the Bhodro society, the idea of slum dwellers is something, they live in a different kind of a world, and they are not something who could actually be included as a part of literature. So, as I said, Shaw took up these issues which are generally brushed under the carpet, which people don't talk about, which is erased from social consciousness, from mass consciousness, and he brought them up and he allowed a discussion to happen. Okay, he blasted the silence and he challenged this kind of erasure. Erasure, this word is coming from erasing, from deleting something. You are deleting the experiences of the underprivileged from the world of art and literature. Okay, but Shaw is resisting that. Shaw is saying, no, we cannot allow that to happen. We need to bring in these voices. We need to make sure that they are also heard. And his next play, which was promptly banned, was called Mrs. Warren's Profession. And you can guess what the profession was. Mrs. Warren's profession was prostitution. So once again, you see, in this very genteel kind of Bhodro society, prostitutes don't exist. You don't talk about them. But Shaw brought them up onto the stage and he allowed the discussion to happen. So Shaw emerged as a leader in a new way of thought and a champion of intellectual freedom. Okay. Much later, in 1925, Shaw was awarded with the Nobel Prize for Literature. In 1923, just 2 years prior to that, Shaw wrote St. John, which is our topic of discussion today. And overall, he wrote about more than 50 plays. His last play was The Apple Cart, which was in 1929. And he died in 1950 at the age of 94. Okay. Now, you see, there is this adjective which we use whenever we talk about Shaw's plays. We say Shavian, Shavian, Shavian. Okay? Now, when I say Shavian, there are a few things that I think you need to know, because this is something that would be reflected when we discuss the play proper. The first thing about a Shavian play is the idea of using the theatre as an instrument of social change, as an instrument whereby you can disseminate, means you can spread out messages or give out messages to society. So Shaw used the stage just like a priest uses the pulpit. Okay, the priest uses the pulpit to reform society, to give out lessons, to give out moral lessons, to educate. So similarly, Shaw also used the stage. Now you see, there are these two phrases, and I'm quite sure you've heard them at least. One is art for art's sake, and one is art for life's sake. Art for art's sake means where art is used, art doesn't just mean painting. Where art is used, it can be any art, it can be literature, it can be painting, it can be sculpture, it can be dancing, it can be photography, it can be music, anything. Where art for art's sake means art is used only to give pleasure. It is not used to instruct or to educate or to rectify our opinions of anything. The opposite is art for life's sake. That is, Art is used to give out a kind of a moral lesson, to give a kind of a, to educate people. Now, this is what Shaw believed. Shaw believed in art for life's sake. And he actually said that I would not have written a single line had it not been with some intention of trying to reform society. Now, this is the first point. The second point is that, as you all know, no conflict, no drama. Okay? So the crux of any drama is a kind of a conflict that is there. Now, if two people start fighting, that is also a conflict. But that conflict is on a physical level. All right? With Shaw, the conflict was at a mental level. Okay? Now, this is Shaw's idea of an intellectual comedy. That you look at something from two different vantage points. Take, for instance, all right? Say you have this mobile, right? Now, you are looking at this particular side of the mobile, and I am looking at it from the other side. But we both are looking at the same mobile. But our vantage points are different. I see one particular aspect of the mobile, you see another aspect of the mobile, and we are both looking at the same mobile. Now, this is something that can happen with abstract ideas as well. Take, for instance, love. Rahina and Bluntschli, initially at least Rahina, or say Sargius and Bluntschli, have totally different viewpoints about war. All right? Rahina and Bluntschli have totally different viewpoints about love. It's the same thing. Now, therefore, the conflict is on a mental level. This is what makes the play an intellectual comedy. Okay? And it is also this huge amount of investment in ideas. I repeat that. This huge amount of investment in ideas, meaning to say his plays talk about various ideas. So it is these ideas which make his plays what we generally known as the play of ideas or the problem plays. Shaw makes us laugh, but he makes us think at the same time. This is the age where, you buy something and you get something else free. You buy a toothpaste and you get a toothbrush free. So Shaw gives us laughter, but with the laughter, he gives us thought as a free item, as a free gift. He makes us laugh. Take, for instance, go back again to your undergraduate days. Bluntschli says, what use are cartridges in a battle? I always carry chocolates instead. And you laugh. But as you laugh, you also think, what is this guy actually trying to say? What is he saying? So you see, your laughter is coupled with thought. This is a typical Shavian situation. And the third thing that I would like you to consider is that Shaw does not believe in painting one side white and one side black. He doesn't have, heroes as such, and he doesn't have villains as such. All right? I mean, Sargius is not a villain. You won't call him a villain, will you? And Bluntschli is not a hero. He is an anti-hero. So you don't have heroes and villains. What do you have? You have people with different points of views, and Shaw allows them to have their say. And he leaves it on the audience to actually come to some kind of a conclusion. Okay? So that is a very important kind of a thing. Now, before I move into the play, I would like to, two things. One is, am I audible? Two is, am I making any sense with you all? Is it making, are you understanding something? I would like some kind of a feedback before I move on.
Yes, sir, you are perfectly audible and we are getting your points.
You're getting my point. That's very nice. So this is a kind of a basic thing. Now we move on to Saint Joan. And you see, Saint Joan is apparently a historical play. Okay. When I say apparently a historical play, I would say that it comes from a kind of a, there was a historical figure called Joan there, and it is true that Joan was burnt at the stake. All right. It is true that she actually raised the siege of Orleans. She did all these things. So in that sense, it's historical. But I don't think Shaw, and you will understand my point, that Shaw used these historical resources to fulfill some other purpose that he had in mind. He was not really concerned about the history part of it, though the history part automatically creeps in because of certain, that kind of provides a framing to the play. You know what is a framing? For instance, suppose you paint a very nice, landscape on a piece of canvas, all right? But you have to display it. Now, to display it, what do you need? You need a wooden frame. Okay, you cannot display it without the frame. Okay, so the frame is as important as the canvas that you have painted. All right. So in that sense, this whole historical framing is something that is very important, and we will do that in detail so as to contextualize the play. You see, this person called Joan was born in 1412. I would request all of you to have your notepads and your, pens ready. You may have to write down a few things that would be helpful for you, because these, apart from just understanding, these are things that are very specific and that need to be written down. So 1412, this is the Middle Ages. Joan of Arc was born. Okay. Just a minute. Yes, I had a call coming in. So Joan of Arc was born in 1412, and she was basically a village lass, meaning a village girl who used to look after the activities of a farm. But in around 1428, please remember this year because we will come back to this year again when we do the larger historical scene. In 1428, she suddenly started saying that she had visions and voices telling her that she should actually go and help the French. He was still not crowned as the king. We call him the Dauphin. The Dauphin is the prince. He should help the French prince to drive the English out of France. So this was a realization she suddenly got. She said, I am getting these visions. I am getting these voices from God. And God is telling me, the saints, not exactly God, but the saints, Saint Margaret and Saint Catherine. These are the two saints that she keeps talking about. He says, these two saints come to me and they are telling me that you should take the responsibility of actually going to meet the Dauphin, who is the prince, and help him to drive the English out of France. Because in 1428, the English had attacked and had taken over almost half of France. I will come to that historical background. Let me just finish this Joan part. Okay, and in 1428, she actually went and did this. Okay, she actually went and she fought the battle with the English, and she instilled a lot of confidence in the French soldiers, and she won victory after victory. But however, she was looked upon as an angel. Okay, she was looked upon as God sent by the French. They practically worshipped her. But please try to understand that this is the tricky part of it. This is a 16 or 17-year-old girl who is defeating the most seasoned and the most veteran generals of the British army, of the English army. while the French consider Joan to be an angel, what do you think the British would consider her to be? Because a 17-year-old girl is actually defeating the most veteran generals of the English army. So naturally, they said that this girl is a witch. She is doing black magic. Otherwise, how is it possible that someone who is just 17 years old would actually be able to defeat us? So the French considered her to be God sent. The English considered her to be sent by the devil. To understand this equation, right? The two sides of the coin. So in 1431, she was captured by the British. And we will discuss this, which is the root of the whole thing. We will discuss this. She was captured 1430 she was captured actually, and that trial went on for almost 1 year. And in 1431, she was burnt at stake. Burnt at stake means she was burnt on a pile of wood as a witch in public view, in front of everybody. She was burnt as a witch. Okay. In 1456, she was rehabilitated. Rehabilitated means her case was again opened, and it was announced that the judgment of 1431 was all false. And they even dug up the bones of the judge of 1431 and threw the bones into the sewer. Okay. So 1456, she was rehabilitated. She was no longer looked upon as a witch by the Christian church. But this has always captured the imagination of the French in a very large way. And in 1904, she was declared as blessed by the Vatican Church, the Pope. Okay, now you see, in the Christian church, you have these three stages to canonization. What is canonization? Canonization means declared as a saint. For instance, Mother Teresa is canonized, means Mother Teresa has been declared as a saint. So she is now a saint. She is now Saint Teresa. She's no longer just Mother Teresa, she is Saint Teresa. What happens when you are declared as a saint? In the Christian church, you can offer your prayers to God through the saint. So the saint becomes the intercessor. That is the word that is used. Intercessor means the middleman. Okay, you can send your prayers to the Almighty through the saint. So that is the whole idea. But in the Christian church, you do not become a saint straight away. There is this three steps to it. First is you are declared as blessed. Second is you are declared as venerable. And the third is you are declared as canonized, which is the final step of sainthood. So 1904, she was declared as blessed. 1908, she was declared as venerable. In 1920, okay, this is after the First World War. So remember, there was a whole lot of, a resurgence means a revival of the spirit of nationalism. Okay. And so in 1920, she was canonized as a saint. All right. So a quick recap. 1412, she was born. 1428, she fought and she won victories for the French. 1431, she was burnt. After that, 1456, they said that no, she was not a witch. Okay, she was a good person. Okay, fine. Then, after about 400-500 years, in 1904, she is declared blessed. 1908, she is declared venerable. 1920, she is canonized. So 489 years it took the church to realize that the girl they had burnt as a witch is not a witch but a saint. So it took the church 489 years to realize their mistake. Okay. Now with that, now I will come to the historical background, which will place the play in context. You see, the play is, the historical background is the 100 Years' War. You can write this down. The 100 Years' War, which was between the years 1338 to 1453. Now, of course, it's more than 100 years, and I am quite sure that you people are wondering whether this went on for 100 years. It's not as if this 100 Years' War is between the English and the French, and they did not fight for one whole 100 years. But what actually happened was that there was sporadic fighting between the English and the French, okay? And in 1337, it all started in 1337, when Edward III of England said that the French throne belonged to him. This is 1337. After that, there were a number of battles between the English and the French, till in 1415, you had the Battle of Agincourt. Battle of Agincourt, where the English dealt a decisive blow to the French. So the English won in a very big way. Okay? And naturally, there was a treaty after that. And the treaty was heavily tilted in the favor of the English because the English had won the war. This is called the Treaty of Troyes. This Treaty of Troyes was signed in 1420. Now, in this Treaty of Troyes was between Charles VI, who was the French king, and Henry V, who was the English king. It was decided that after Charles VI dies, the throne will go to Henry V's son, that is Henry VI. I repeat, after Charles VI dies, the throne will automatically go, the throne of France will go to the son of Henry V, who was Henry VI. But at that time, he was a minor. This is number one. Number two is that Charles will declare his own son, who in the play is called the Dauphin. The Dauphin is the prince. He is to declare his own son, Dauphin, as illegitimate. Now, to declare his own son as illegitimate means that Dauphin does not have royal blood in his veins, therefore he is not eligible to be the king at any point of time. So these were the two conditions. One, the French throne will automatically pass to the successor of Henry V, that is Henry VI, after the death of the present king, that is Charles VI. And number two, the prince, that is the Dauphin of France, will be declared as illegitimate by the king himself, so that, there are no future chances of him becoming the king. But you see, people keep on fighting for land, but within 2 years, that is 1422, both these kings died. That is Charles VI and Henry V, both of them died. Now, Henry VI was a minor, so he couldn't stake his claim. According to the Treaty of Troyes, he should have been the king of of France, but he could not because he was still a minor. And the Dauphin could not be the king because he had been declared illegitimate. So the funny part was that France was without a king. And this went on for almost 6 years till, remember, 1428, when Joan of Arc came into the scene. So from 1422 to 1428 was an age of absolute turmoil in France. Okay. Nobody was the king. After some years, after a couple of years, Henry VI came of age. Okay, he attained his age. He could become the king. But now when he wanted the throne, nobody was ready to give him. So he attacked France. And then some of the feudal lords in France, they also sided with the king. So ultimately by 1428, half of France was taken up by the English and the rebel feudal lords. So France, as a country wasn't there, as a nation, the idea of the nation wasn't there. And this is something that is very important. We will come back to this again and again. So this is the situation when in 1428, Joan came on the scene. All right. So Joan came on the scene in 1428, and she said that she has been hearing voices which has been telling her to take up arms and fight against the English, okay, so as to drive them away from the French soil, okay. So, in 1428, what she did actually was she did two very important things, and we will come back to this. Two things. What are these two things she did? Number one, she raised the siege of Orleans. Orleans is actually a city in France, which was besieged, means it was totally surrounded by the English. So to raise the siege of Orleans means to make sure that these people are driven out and the city is cleared. Because of repeated defeats at the hand of the English, the morale of the French army was at an all-time low. So it was Joan of Arc who actually took the trouble to raise the siege of Orleans, and this was a military masterstroke. And the other thing she did was she crowned the Dauphin as the French king. Okay, she crowned the Dauphin as Charles VII in the Cathedral of Reims, and nobody really questioned her at that time because she was looked upon as God sent. Okay, so in that sense, what happened was she actually gave France a king. She gave France a symbolic head of the nation around which the nation could revolve. See, I am always talking about the idea of the nation. This is very important for this play. We will come to this. I am only making the basic kind of things ready. Now, before I move into the other things, I also want to talk about two things before I move on. The first thing is the idea of the feudal system. Okay. The idea of the feudal system. Feudal system, basically in India, we have always heard this word called zamindari system. So in the Middle Ages, the socio-political economic structure was the feudal system. Now in the feudal system, you had the king at the top. Below him, you had the feudal lords, okay? And below him, you had the common people. So you had this three level, all right? You had the common people, then you have the feudal lords, then you have the king. Please remember, this is the kind of hierarchy that we have, all right? Now, the king, of course, is the head, but he is the symbolic head. Because you see, the military power is in the hands of the feudal lords, number one. They are also the people who used to collect the tax. Therefore, the economic power is also in their hands. Number three, the common people, if they had any problems, they could not go to the king. They would go to the feudal lords, who would also be the kind of people who would dispense justice, who would, sit down with them, try a particular case and things like that. So if you look at it, common people, then feudal lords, then king. The common people had a very shadowy idea of the king. They owed their loyalty or their allegiance not to the king, but to the feudal lords. So the feudal lords were the most powerful people in this kind of hierarchy. Now I will talk about the church, and I'll show you a different kind of a hierarchy over there. Please keep all of these things in mind. The hierarchy of the church, who was at the top? God. Okay, and the saints. This was known as the church triumphant. Okay. Below him, you had the church. You had, all the priests and, bishops and archbishops and people like that. The priests. And then you had the common people. Now, the common people did not have any access to God. The common people accessed God through the church. And also, whatever God wanted to say, whether he said anything or not is a different issue, but whatever the church felt that God said would be passed on as a message to the common people. So on one hand, in the feudal, in the structure of the state, you had the king, the feudal lords, and the common people. In the structure of the religious structure, you had God, you had church, and you had the common people. And in both these cases, if the feudal lords are the most powerful in the state, the church is the most powerful in the realm of religion. Because who knows what God is saying? It is the church which is interpreting the God, number one. And if you also wanted to talk to God or send some prayer, it had to be through the church. So this is the kind of structure. And you will find that Joan questions both the structure. That is the most interesting part. There is one more thing that I would like to talk about before we move into this. And that is, you see, I talked about the socialistic leanings of Banachs. You remember Henry George and that lecture that he listened to? And he realized one thing. After listening to that lecture in 1882, he realized one thing, that perhaps the ultimate stage of civilizational evolution would be a kind of a socialistic state. Okay, the ultimate kind of civilizational progress would be that. But you cannot achieve that socialistic state straight away. From feudalism to socialism, there is an intermediary step which he calls the nationalist phase. The nationalist phase meaning this is the phase where nation states emerge. The idea of the nation emerges. So you have India as a nation, you have Nepal as a nation, you have Pakistan as a nation, you have France as a nation. The idea of the nation evolved. So in the civilizational march from feudalism to socialism, we pass through this intermediary phase, which is known as nationalism. All right. Now, Shaw calls Joan the first Protestant and the first nationalist. Now we are moving into one of the major themes of the play. Before I move on into a more, scene-wise critical summary, when we do that, we will of course get into the different, topics which are very important. So Shaw calls Joan the first nationalist and the first Protestant. What does he mean by this? You see, throughout, Joan is saying, she is saying that God made England for the English people and God made France for the French people. When the English people go back to England, they are good people. But when they come into other people's land, then the devil enters into them. And she also says that we in France, all of us, we always speak the same language, which is French. Just like the English speak their language, which is English. She says England is for the English and France is for the French. If you dissect the statement, you will find that for the first time, Joan is talking about the idea of nationalism. She is talking about the idea of the growth of a nation. All right? Now, go back to that structure I talked about. King, the feudal lords, and the common people. What did she give France? She crowned the Dauphin as the king. So she gave France a king. France was without a king. And the king is important precisely because the king becomes a symbol of that nation. So Joan is telling us that, or telling the common people, that you owe your loyalty to your king, because France is for the French, England is for the English. Right? So who feels threatened? It's the feudal lords who feel threatened. Because till now, they were the most important part. The king was a very shadowy presence. The idea of the nation hardly existed. You had small principalities. You had small areas which were ruled by certain, people, certain feudal lords. These common people had their loyalty to these feudal lords. But the king wasn't there in their lives. The king wasn't there in their consciousness. Joan is saying you owe your loyalty to the king. Joan is talking about one language for the whole of France. She's talking about this kind of a linguistic nationalism, as it were. She's talking about England is for the English and France is for the French. So naturally, she is the first nationalist. And this kind of nationalism becomes a threat for the feudal lords. Because the feudal lords are there precisely because that kind of nationalism is not there. So if Joan is talking about a movement from feudalism to nationalism, she is actually talking about a progress of civilization. I will repeat this, and this is a very important statement. If you can understand this, you have understood quite a bit of the play. That Joan's idea of nationalism is also an idea of an upward movement of civilization. From feudalism to nationalism, if you remember, from nationalism to socialism. But before you come to that ultimate stage of socialism, you have to pass through an intermediate phase, which is the phase of nationalism. And Joan is the genius, the Shavian genius, we'll come to this, the person who is trying to help humanity or help civilization to move from this level of socialism, level of feudalism to nationalism, which of course is a big leap. Maybe it is not the final or the ultimate. The final or the ultimate, according to Shaw, would be socialism. But it certainly is an improvement on feudalism. But Shaw also calls Joan the first Protestant. What does he mean by that? To say that Joan is the first Protestant, go back to the structure of the church, the religious structure that we talked about. You had God, then you had the church, and then you had the common people. All right? I said that the common people could not access God. The common people could not access God. It was only through the church, which is called the Church Militant, actually. You have these two phrases. One is called the Church Triumphant, which is the church in heaven and all that, the saints and all those, the gods and saints and all that. And then you had the priests and bishops and all that. They are called the Church Militant. So you had to go through the Church Militant. You had to go through the church on earth. Now, Joan is saying that, please mark this, it's very interesting. Joan is saying that Saint Margaret and Saint Catherine come to her and give her visions. They talk to her. She hears their voices. What is Joan actually trying to say? Joan is saying that she has access directly to God without the intervening church on earth. Is it making sense to you? Because what is Joan saying? That Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret come to me and talk to me and tell me, this is what you are supposed to do. So what she's saying practically is that she doesn't need the church to access God. This would imply, or this would create a kind of a threat for the church. Because today, as we find in the trial scene, this is what Bishop Concha says, today there is one Joan, tomorrow there will be 10 Joans, next day there will be 100 Joans, then there will be 10,000 Joans. All of them will say that we have direct connection with God. We do not need the church. So what would be the justification of having the church? So the church as an institution would automatically feel threatened by Joan. So the fact that Joan places her individual judgment, please mark my words over here, her individual judgment over the collective wisdom and the constituted authority of the church makes her the first Protestant. So she is the first nationalist because she is the person who gave France a king, and she is the person who is talking about France for the French and England for the English. She is the first Protestant because she is talking about an individual relationship with God without the intervening agency of the church on earth, which is the Church Militant. So she's talking about this. So that's why she is the first Protestant and she is the first nationalist. And that's why she actually gets burned, which we will see as we continue with the play. Now, before I move on, again, I would like some kind of a feedback. Am I audible? Is my voice okay? And are you with me?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. You are perfectly audible, and we are getting your points, and we are with you. You carry on.
All right. All right. So, you see, it's a bit of an effort to only lecture without any kind of a feedback. You have a feeling that you're talking to a wall, but now I understand that this is a very living wall. So thank you for that. All right. So now, let me quickly move into the text. I have more or less given you these things. You see, we've talked about the feudal system. We've talked about the three stages in the evolution of civilization. We've talked about the intellectual growth of Shaw. We've talked about Joan in history, and we've talked about the historical background, which is the 100 Years' War, the Battle of Agincourt, and all this from the Treaty of Troyes, and then 1422 with the death of Charles VI. There is absolute turmoil in France till 1428 when Joan comes into the picture. Okay, in 1431, of course, she's dead. All right. But of course, before she dies, she does one thing very important. She gives France a king. All right. And she talks about nationalism. And you will understand Joan had this foresight because very soon, feudalism, of course, vanishes. All right. Feudalism had to move on and give way to nationalism, number one. And maybe another, 30, 40 years later, you would have Martin Luther King. I'm not talking about the black activist. I'm talking about Martin Luther King from the church, who broke the church into two halves, and you had the Protestants coming out. So Joan was a visionary, you see. Joan was mentally excessive. Joan was an intellectual giant. She could see the future. The others could not see the future. You see, that is the reason why I said that for Shaw, it is not a conflict between heroes and villains. You see, if the people who represent the feudal aristocracy and the people who represent the church at the time, they feel that the world will not change. It will continue like this forever. Okay, that is what they feel. But that is not the case at all. Joan realized that the world is bound to change. And she is an agent of this evolution. This is something which we'll come back to again and again. She is the agent of this civilizational progress. She is talking about a movement from a feudal state to a nationalist state. This is a kind of a civilizational progress. She is talking about a movement from Catholicism to Protestantism, where what is Catholicism? You do not question anything. You accept whatever is being given to you by your religious leaders, by the Church Militant. Protestantism talks about individual choices. Protestantism talks about individual relationship with the Godhead. This is a kind of a progress. This is a spirit of questioning. And this spirit of questioning implies a higher order of civilization. Now, I come to the first scene of the play. You see, the first scene of the play, it opens in 1429. Okay, 1428, remember, this is the time when Joan had these voices and visions telling her that she needs to, go and raise the seas of Orleans. And, she started seeing all these visions. So 1429, she goes to this castle of Vaucouleurs, which is there. And there you have this local chieftain. His name is Robert de Baudricourt. Yes. Now, she goes over there. This play starts in a rather comic kind of a note. You see, you find Robert de Baudricourt, and he is trying to bully his servant, his steward. Okay, the steward comes and says, there are no eggs. And Robert is saying, you are stealing all the eggs. And he says, you are stealing the eggs, you are stealing the milk and everything. And the steward says, no, I'm not doing anything like that. The thing is, we are bewitched. Why are we bewitched? Because there is a maid there waiting to meet you. And this maid seems to have come from God. And if you don't meet her, none of the hens will lay eggs. And we will soon have nothing at all. And Robert de Baudricourt, of course, does not believe him. Okay? And he is bullying him. But the steward, it's a very comic kind of a thing. The steward says, it is not my fault. I cannot lay eggs. Okay. Now, this goes on for some time. So ultimately what happens is Baudricourt says that, okay, fine, bring in the maid. I'll meet her. And he feels that, the maid is someone who is a little crazy in the head. And so he'll send her back to her father with instructions to thrash her. But ultimately, there is such a positivity about Joan that even Baudricourt is won over. And what are Joan's demands? Joan says that you are to provide me with a horse and an armor. I don't need any fancy armor. Any armor which will fit me will do. But I need a horse, and you'll provide me with a few companions, some soldiers. And I will go to Chinon, where the Dauphin is. Who is the Dauphin? You know that the uncrowned prince who has been declared illegitimate by his own father due to the Treaty of Troyes. So this is the Dauphin. Now the Dauphin, of course, cannot be the king because he has been declared illegitimate. And now it's impossible because half of France has already been occupied. But if at all there is anyone who can claim any kind of kingship, it is the Dauphin. And Joan says that, right? And Joan is, you must understand, an unlettered means uneducated girl from the village. She's hardly 16, 17 years old. And she comes and she says, those are your orders to me from my lord. So look at what she says. Okay. She says, good morning, Captain Squire. Captain, you are to give me a horse and armor and some soldiers and send me to the Dauphin. Those are your orders from my lord. And Robert is absolutely outraged. He says, your lord? Who the devil may your lord be? Go back to him and tell him that I am neither duke nor peer at his orders. I am the squire of Baudricourt, and I take no orders except from the king. And Joan says reassuringly, yes, squire, that is all right. My lord is the king of heaven, And Robert said, why, the girl is mad. Why didn't you tell me so, you blockhead? He tells that to the servant. But you see, despite all this, Joan is very popular amongst the soldiers, and the soldiers are ready to pay the money for the horse. They are ready to give her the armor. They are ready to accompany her. So all of this happens, and ultimately, Baudricourt, in spite of being very loud, he is very weak-willed, and he accepts. Okay, and he says, okay, I am sending you to Chinon to meet the Dauphin, which is fine. Okay, but I am not going to take the trouble of introducing her or anything like that. Let's see what happens. If she really comes from God, she will find out ways of doing this. And after he does this, the hens start laying eggs like mad. Okay, and Baudricourt crosses himself and says she did come from God. So this is how the first scene ends. Now you see, the very opening of Saint Joan establishes Joan as an anti-romantic Shavian Superman. You see, Joan is not described as someone very beautiful. Joan is wearing the clothes of a man. And this is very important, because you see, the matter of a kind of a sexual, or the idea of sexuality has to be kept out of it. Joan has to be looked upon as a comrade in arms by the other soldiers. She shouldn't be looked upon as a woman. Okay? She is irreverent, she's plain speaking, she is impulsive, okay? And there is this defeminization of Joan. But along with defeminization, she is looked upon as someone who has bulging eyes, which is the case with imaginative people. This is what Shaw tells us. And this is very important, because this will relate to her idea of voices and visions. And even over here, she talks about the ideas of nationalism. You see, she says, and I'll read this out to you. She says, what does it matter? We all speak French, okay? And she goes on to say, we are all subjects of the King of Heaven. He gave us our countries and our languages, and he meant us to keep to them. If it were not so, it would be murder to kill an Englishman in battle, all right? So she goes on to say that this whole idea that the English soldiers should be in England and the French soldiers should be in France, and God gave us our languages. So she is, right from this beginning, in her own very simple way, she is talking about the idea of nationalism. Okay, so the first act, or the first scene, places the whole thing into perspective. Now, in the next scene, the second scene, is the antechamber of the Dauphin in Chinon. Okay, and there you see the Dauphin is a very weak-willed, very miserable kind of a character. All right, this is, and he is bullied by the archbishop. He is bullied by, the army chief. He's bullied by everybody around him. He is very poor. He is very ill-dressed. And before Joan comes in, they decide, okay, we must put a test to Joan. Okay, and so there is this other person called Giles, and he goes and sits on the throne. But Joan enters and says, you cannot be the king, all right? So she moves around and she gets hold of the Dauphin and says, this is the Dauphin. And the Dauphin is extremely jubilant. He says, you see, she can actually see and identify the royal blood. Because one of his greatest inferiority complex was that he had been declared as being illegitimate by his own parents. Okay, remember the Treaty of Troyes. Okay, so ultimately, the Dauphin gives her the charge of the French army. Yes, and even the archbishop is hugely impressed by her. So she has a way of doing things. Now, in scene 3, what happens is, the next scene, that is, scene 3, what happens is, this is set on the river Loire, which is close to Orleans. Now, Orleans is on that other bank of the river, and you need a favorable wind. During those days, you did not have motor boats. You had wind. You had boats with sails. So you needed a favorable wind, a wind that was blowing east for the river, for the boats with the soldiers to cross over. Now over here, Dunois, who was, trying to handle the whole thing over there, the commander of the French army over there, she had been praying for this wind for quite a few days. And Joan comes over there, all right? And there is something magical about Joan. And immediately after Joan comes, the direction of the wind changes. So now it becomes a favorable wind, so that Dunois can actually cross his soldiers over to the other side to raise the siege of Orleans. Now this raising the siege of Orleans is a very important masterstroke in military terms. Because as I said, that, just like cricket, battles also have a very psychological side to it. The French army had been losing again and again. And because they had been losing again and again, their morale was at an all-time low. Therefore, it was very important that they win a difficult battle so that they do not look upon the British as being invincible. Invincible means someone who cannot be conquered. So it was a huge boost for their morale. Now, once this direction of the wind changes, he is ready to move over. And, Dunois looks upon Joan as someone who has been sent by God. So you see scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, all three of them end with a kind of a miracle. Now, this grips the attention of the audience. In theatrical terms, the play becomes a huge success. But this is not what Shaw is trying to put across to us. You see, Shaw is trying to put across something else, which will come in scene 4. And this is very crucial to the understanding and of the play. And as I discuss the scene, you will understand everything will fall into pieces. All that I have discussed till now. You see, the fourth scene takes place in a tent in the English camp with John D. Stogumber. John D. Stogumber is the English chaplain, and Richard D. Beecham. So Richard D. Beecham on one hand, and on the other hand, who is the Earl of Warwick? Generally all the questions they say, who's the Earl of Warwick? The Earl of Warwick over here actually symbolizes the feudal aristocracy. Is that clear? So on one hand, you have the Earl of Warwick. His name is Richard D. Beecham. But anyways, once you get your books, if you read, you will be more familiar with the names. But let us call him the Earl of Warwick for the sake of convenience, or just Warwick. On the other hand, you have Bishop Cawshaw. Cawshaw is the representative of the church. Now, this is a discussion between Cawshaw on one hand, who is the representative of the church, and the Earl of Warwick, who is the representative of the feudal lords. All right. And you can once again go back to the structure that we talked about, the structure of the state, where you have the king, the feudal lords, and the common people, and the structure of religion, where you have God and the church militant, or the church on earth, and then you have the the common people. Okay. So now, Warwick represents the interests of the feudal aristocracy, and Cawshaw naturally represents the church. Okay, and you see, these two institutions, they never liked each other during the Middle Ages, because there was a kind of a power conflict between the church and the state, between the church and the feudal lords. So they did not like each other. So Bishop Cawshaw and the Earl of Warwick are not necessarily friends. They are not friends. All right. But they become friends precisely because they have a common enemy in Joan. Why do they have a common enemy in Joan? Because For the feudal lords, for Earl of Warwick, Joan is talking about nationalism, which will destroy feudalism. So, he, as the representative of feudalism, doesn't want Joan. He wants Joan to be destroyed. On the other hand, Bishop Cawshaw, who represents the Church Militant, or the Church on earth, as I said, he looks upon Joan as someone who is destabilizing the Church, who is talking about individual communion with God, who is talking about Protestantism. Remember, the first nationalist and the first Protestant. Therefore, you see, Joan is actually Shaw's definition of a genius. Who is a genius according to Shaw? A genius is a person who would help civilization to move on from one stage, from a lower stage to a higher stage of achievement. Joan is talking about individual freedom. Joan is talking about individual relationship to God. Joan is talking about nationalism. So Joan is talking about a movement of civilization. Joan is talking about an upward movement of civilization. So Joan, therefore, is an evolutionary genius. She is a Shavian genius. Now, the problem is not that Bishop Cawshaw or the Earl of Warwick are villains. Please understand. If you remember, I said that in a Shavian play, you do not have a hero or a villain. They are not villains. The problem with them is that they are short-sighted. If they can see 1 meter, Joan can see 100 meters ahead. The bishop feels that the church is going to remain as it is without any reformation. But that was not the case. The church broke because of the Reformation. Bishop Cawshaw cannot see that, but Joan sees it. Because Joan is far-sighted. She is a mental giant. She is a genius. She understands that civilization is not going to remain stagnant at a particular phase or at a particular stage. Civilization will move. The Earl of Warwick feels that all throughout till eternity, you will have something like a feudal system. But that is not the case. Feudalism will go, and in its place will come nationalism. The Earl of Warwick doesn't realize it, but Joan realizes it. So, you see, it is not as if the Earl of Warwick or Bishop Cawshaw is against Joan as a person. They are against the ideas that Joan talks about, the ideas of nationalism and the ideas of Protestantism. Okay, so Bishop Cawshaw tries his best to save Joan, for instance, because for him, the soul of Joan is just as important as the soul of anybody else. So even in the trial scene, he keeps on telling her to repent, to recant, to say that no, it was not God who was in touch with you, it was the devil. Now look at the catch over there. When she says that Saint Margaret and Saint Catherine came and talked to her, she is saying that she is in contact with God. But if she says that no, I heard voices, I saw visions, but they were not from God, they were from the devil, then what happens? The church is safe. There is no threat to the church, isn't it? So this is what Bishop Cawshaw and everybody tries to tell Joan. That, okay, fine, you heard visions. You saw visions, you heard voices. But you accept that those voices and visions are not from God, they are from the devil. Now, once she accepts it, what happens? Once she accepts it, it means that the church at least is safe. Nobody is threatening the church. Okay, somebody had some contact with the devil. That has nothing to do with the church. The church is safe. If you want to access God, you access it through the church. There is no one who can access the church access God without the church. So that is the reason why they keep on telling Joan. See, Joan, what she does is it is the protest of the individual soul against the interference by the priest. So it is the kind of communion between the private man and the God. So this is the spirit of Protestantism, which Kosha has a problem with. And therefore he feels that because he is entitled with saving the church, he must get rid of Joan. So even though he doesn't like Warwick, and even though Warwick doesn't like doesn't like Kosha, the two of them get together because Joan is their common enemy. Joan is talking of nationalism, which is a threat to the feudal structure. Joan is talking of Protestantism, which is a threat to the church. Therefore, she must be eliminated. And this is scene 4, which is a very important kind of, turning point where the whole idea comes across. Now, in the 5th scene, this is what is known as a political masterstroke by Banachs, where you find that Joan ultimately goes ahead with the coronation of the Dauphin. Now, the coronation of the Dauphin means that Joan is able to provide a symbolic head of the nation to the French people, to the common people, so that they can move away from their allegiance and their loyalty to the feudal lords and give their loyalty to the king. So once again, you see the structure of the nation is coming across in more clearer terms. We are talking about the emergence of the nation. So scene 5 is the coronation of Charles VII. Till now, we called him the Dauphin. Okay. In the Cathedral of Reims. Why is the Cathedral of Reims so important? Because all the coronation of the French kings take place in the Cathedral of Reims. And therefore, nobody will question his coronation. So, and thereafter, she talks about her visions and voices to Dunois. Now, and Dunois says that I would never have believed in your visions and voices, but I have realized that they give you very sane advice. And they make you very successful. Now, when we discuss these visions and voices and visions, we'll talk about these 3 things. Now, these are basically 3 things that the voices and visions have told her. Number 1, dress as a man, which is very commonsensical. Because as I said, sexuality has to be kept out of this. Otherwise, she will not be able to survive as a soldier among soldiers. She cannot be looked upon as a woman. 2, she was told to raise the seas of Orleans, which ultimately led to victories after victories, because it is a question of boosting the morals. And number 3 is the coronation of the Dauphin at the Cathedral of Reims. But after this, what happens is we find that she wants to take Paris, which is under the English. She has not been able to take Paris, and everybody tells her that this would not be the right time, but she goes ahead with it. And this is what ultimately leads to her downfall, in the sense like she is captured and, ultimately she is burnt at stake. The next scene is scene 6, which is popularly known as the trial scene. Now, you will find that this trial scene, Shaw tells us, please mark this, very important, Shaw tells us that Joan had a very fair trial. Compared to a lot of other trials in the Middle Ages, Joan had a very fair trial. Because Shaw is not concerned about the trial of one person called Joan of Arc. Shaw is looking at it in a historical dialectic. Shaw is looking at it as a conflict of ideas, where Joan is putting across a particular idea of civilization, whereas the others, that is her opponents, cannot understand what she is saying. They are not far-sighted enough. They are not wise enough. Joan is the genius who is helping civilization to progress. That's why, you see, they keep telling her that you recant and say that, no, whatever you said is from whatever voices you heard is from the devil. You see, that is the reason, so that, the church remains safe. Now, in this, there's high drama in the trial scene. I think I'm running short of time, but I'll just wrap this up, and then I will ask whoever is hosting this about the kind of time that I have. So there is high drama over here where Joan says that I will be saved. My voices and visions tell me that I'll be saved. Okay. But ultimately, when she sees that, no, she's not going to be saved, so she recants. She says, okay, give me whatever you want, I will sign. And she signs. But after she signs, she is told that, okay, your life is saved, but since you have done blasphemy, since you have spoken against the religion, you will be put into a prison all your life. So you'll be imprisoned all your life. And that is the time when she goes and tears up that recantation and says, you are not fit that I should live amongst you. And then she goes and she's ready to die. And you will find that the trial scene ends very significantly with the executioner saying that her heart would not burn. Mark the words, her heart would not burn. The rest of her we threw in the river, but the heart would not burn. That is the last you have heard of her. And Warwick says, I wonder whether it is the last we have heard of her. Okay, these are not the exact words. The exact words are, I'll read it out for you. It says, just a minute. The last of her, I wonder. So this is Warwick. You see, what does this mean? Her heart would not burn. The heart is a symbol of the ideas that she stood for. So Joan, the body has perished, but Joan, the ideas live on. The ideas of nationalism and Protestantism will live on. And ultimately, they will find a new kind of they will take roots. They will help civilization to progress. Joan, the genius who helped civilization to move from one stage to another, is someone we could not identify. This is something that happens with all our geniuses. We crucified Christ. We gave hemlock to Socrates. We put Galileo in the prison. These are people who helped civilization to move forward. We burnt Joan on a stake. So this is what Shaw is telling us, that these people are way ahead of their time. Because they are way ahead of their times, they are helping us to move ahead. But we, since we are not at their intellectual level, we cannot understand them. And therefore, we either kill them, or we poison them, or we crucify them, or we hang them, or we burn them. All right? So, and finally, he ends up with an epilogue. And an epilogue, St. John, is a kind of a semi-comic fantasy where you have this lengthy, dreamy sequence where Charles VII is, he's the king now, and he has attained some kind of stature, some kind of personality. If you remember that after he became the king in 1456, he rehabilitated Joan. Why do you think he rehabilitated Joan? Because deep down within him was that feeling that if Joan remains a witch, or at least declared as a witch, then everybody would say that he got his crown from a witch. So he took all the trouble to make sure that he was rehabilitated. Okay, that they annulled means they cancelled the judgment of 1431. So now in this is a dream. So it's possible to break everything. Break time and space. You see, like, for instance, I am over here. And I am speaking to you in a particular time. I cannot break the time. I cannot break the space. But in a dream, I can break both time and space. I can be in different places. I can, move back into time. I can go back into past. I can go forward into future. So you see, through this epilogue, through this particular dramatic medium, Shaw is able to condense and expand time and space. Meaning to say, it is possible for him to show what is happening in 1904. That is, she's declared as blessed. It is possible for him to show what is happening in 1908. It is possible for him to show the canonization. Okay, and it is possible for him to talk about all these people. And it is a very interesting thing. The last line of the play, right? When Joan says, "Let me come back again, then." And they say, no, please don't come back. And Joan says, very significant lines, "O God that madest this beautiful earth, when will it be ready to receive thy saints? How long, O Lord, how long? How long would it take for mankind to understand their own saints and their own martyrs? How long will it take us not to destroy our own saints? Because whenever they come for our good, but we destroy them." Okay, so this is how it ends. Okay, now I see it's already 5:37 in my laptop. Whoever is hosting, I don't know if sir is around, or how much time do I have, or do I continue? Do I end up, wrap up? What is it? Is there anyone who can let me know how much time I have? Do I continue?
Yes, sir. You can continue. Can you hear me, Sumasri? Sumasri?
Yes, yes.
Please respond to sir.
Hello?
Sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
See, I was told this should go on for about 1.5 hours, right? I think we have already completed 1.5 hours. There are a few topics which would be, I think, quite pertinent for your, university exams and for an understanding of the play. So I could continue maybe for another 15 minutes or so, but I am not very sure whether that is all right with all of you. Do let me know.
Yes, sir, you can continue, sir.
Yes, so I continue. Are all of you there with me, or?
Yes, sir.
We are with you.
How many of you are there?
Yes, sir. Please continue.
Yes, how many of you are there right now with me?
Near
Sir,
about
now
47 people.
47 participants.
47 people, okay. All right, after that, I would want you to please open up unmute the audios so that we could have some kind of an interactive session. I would just talk about two things, and then I want you to open up the audio so that we can have some kind of an interactive thing. Otherwise, it falls flat, right? Is that okay with you all? Yes?
Okay, sir.
All right. Now, I would just talk about a couple of things. Number one, Joan as an instrument of the evolutionary appetite. Okay. You see, what is appetite? Appetite means hunger. Okay. Now, Joan, you see, let me tell you one thing, that when you read St. John, you will find that the book is always published with a preface. And the preface runs into, almost, in my book, it is 62 pages, but yes, roughly 60, 65 pages. And I think I have this unhappy suspicion that Banachs did not feel that people would understand him the way he wanted them to understand him. And so he took all the trouble to write these prefaces. And interestingly, all the answers to most of the issues he has discussed in this preface. And he has discussed them very cleverly under subheadings. So if you open the preface, you will find these subheadings, okay? And you will find subheadings like, the evolutionary appetite. You will find subheadings like Joan's voices and visions, or you will find subheadings like failure of the voices. All right. So practically everything he has discussed is just, that his language may be something that we do not generally use nowadays, but the ideas are all there. So I would suggest that you read up sections of this preface wherein Banachs has made things very easy for you. Now, I would go into just one thing. I'll go into two things, and I won't take much time. You have been here with me for about 1.5 hours already. So another maybe 10 minutes or so, where I will discuss two things. One is Joan as an instrument of the evolutionary appetite. You see, appetite, as I said, is hunger. Okay. Now, what is evolutionary appetite? He says, and I am quoting him from his preface, Okay, this is very important. That's why I told you the preface is very important, where he makes things very simple for all of us. He says, he says, there are forces at work which use individuals for purposes far transcending the purpose of keeping these individuals alive and prosperous and respectable and happy and safe in the middle station of life. Okay, now what does this mean? I mean, you may find it a little complicated. What he's saying is, he is talking about an abstract force called life force, L capital, F capital. He's talking about an abstract force called life force. This is, what is life force? Life force is something that is acting in some of us. Please remember, only in some of us, not in all of us. Only in some of us, this life force is acting. And the purpose of this life force is to help humankind to evolve from a lower stage to a higher stage. Am I clear? I'll repeat. There is something called life force. This is an abstract idea that Shaw has. He spells life force with a capital L and a capital F. Life force acts through some of us, not all, please. Through some of us. And the purpose of this life force is to help human beings to evolve from a lower stage to a higher stage. This is evolution. Now, this kind of evolution is against Darwin's theory of evolution. Shaw did not believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. What was Darwin's theory of evolution? Survival of the fittest. Okay, so it was a purely biological thing. Shaw said that in Darwin's theory of evolution, there is no place of the will. W with a capital W. There is no place of the individual will. Meaning you do not evolve because you want to evolve. This is missing in the Darwinian theory. So what does he want? He says that we evolve because we want to evolve. Human beings by nature are destined to evolve. Therefore, some people become the instruments of this evolution. This is the Shavian genius like St. John. Some people become the instruments of evolutionary improvement, civilizational progress. They are the instruments of evolutionary appetite. Now, this appetite, for instance, when we eat, how does it affect us? It benefits us, but does it benefit anybody else? No. So that's why Shaw says, hunger is a personal need. I repeat, hunger is a personal need. But the hunger for evolution doesn't benefit us. It benefits everybody else. It benefits the human race. Therefore, evolutionary appetite is a super-personal need. Hunger is a personal need. Evolutionary appetite is a super-personal need. It doesn't benefit us. You see, as I said, the Shavian genius through whom life force is acting, who is the instrument of evolutionary appetite, is often killed, or he is poisoned, or he is burnt, or he is crucified, or he is imprisoned. So there is no way that he benefits personally, but his action benefits the human race. That's why now those who have this life force acting within them, they cannot rest till they have achieved what they are destined to achieve. I mean, St. Joan or Joan of Arc could have easily stayed at home and looked after her cows and sheep. Yes, and got married and, led a settled family life. But she didn't do that. Why? Because the evolutionary appetite was working through her. And it will not allow her to rest till she has attained or helped civilization to attain the level that is, the movement from feudalism to nationalism, from Catholicism to Protestantism. So that's why she is the instrument of the evolutionary appetite. This is number one. The second thing is Joan's voices and visions. You see, Joan's voices and visions are not something supernatural. Shaw tells us, and I would refer to again to the preface, where he has 3 or 4 sections. You know, he talks about Joan's voices and visions, and he talks about Joan as a Galtonic visualizer and things like that. He's right from the beginning, she keeps on talking about Joan's voices and visions. But you will find that Joan's voices and visions are things that, you know, that are perfectly sane and that are perfectly rational. They tell her to dress like a man. They tell her to raise the seas of Orleans. They tell her to crown the Dauphin at the Cathedral of Reims. Now, all of these are perfectly rational things. They actually helped Joan and they helped France to get rid of the English. Now, it is not the mode through which she got these instructions. It is the rationality of her actions that matter. She is sane. She is rational, even though she goes on saying that it is Saint Margaret and Saint Catherine who told her these. Now, Shaw tells us that there are people, firstly, you see life forces acting through Joan. So she is, as I keep on saying, within quotes, mentally excessive. And she has this huge corpus of imagination. Remember her bulging eyes, right in Scene 1, we are told about this. She has this huge corpus of imagination where what she thinks appears to her in the form of a person, maybe, in the form of some vision, maybe, in the form of some voice, perhaps. You know, this is what is known as the Galtonic visualizer that Shaw talks about in the preface. That some people have this intense imaginative power wherein their thoughts take on, you know, physical, visual or auditory forms. So Joan could hear, could see, but these are all coming to her from what Shaw calls her mother wit, meaning from her own brains. The proof that these voices and visions actually came from her own, you know, self is evident in the trial scene. Now, I'll tell you what happened in the trial scene. In the trial scene, she keeps saying that I am going to be rescued. But ultimately, she is not rescued and she realizes that. Now, you see what happens is, according to Joan's calculation, her military commandant, La Hira, is close by. And if he had actually attacked, then he could have actually set Joan free. But Joan did not realize something, that it is not the physical problem of the task that is important. During the Middle Ages, for anyone to attack a trial of the Inquisition and take away the prisoner was unthinkable. But Joan did not realize this. Joan was, in her own sense, she was naive. She did not realize that. She was thinking that no, La Hira is going to come and help her out. But it is not the physical part of that exploit which was impossible. It was the cultural part of that exploit which was impossible. Culturally, it is impossible to take away a prisoner who is in the hands of the medieval church. Joan did not realize this. Now, since Joan did not realize it, it was not possible for anyone to rescue her. Is that clear? So, this is a very important issue about Joan's voices and visions. And another thing is the tragedy of Saint Joan is often called a high tragedy. Okay, why is it called a high tragedy? You see, generally, in the Aristotelian definition of a tragedy, the tragic figure, okay, the tragic hero or the tragic heroine, is someone who has a hamartia, who has an error of judgment, which leads to her fall. Over here, Saint Joan doesn't have that. The fall is of the common man. who do not understand their saints and martyrs. Okay, so the hamartia doesn't rest with Joan, with the figure of Joan. It rests with the figure of the common man in every generation. And that is precisely what Joan means by the last line, where she says, "O God, thou madest this beautiful earth. When will it be ready to receive thy saints? Oh, how long? O Lord, how long?" Okay. Right. So, of course, there are so many things that are left, and we could go on and on. But I would like whoever is hosting this to kindly unmute people who would like to raise interventions or questions or anything, or even if they have an alternative view to the way I have tried to make sense of this text.
স্যার আই এম হোস্টিং দিস বাট আমি কাউকে আনমিউট করতে পারবো না, মানে যার কোয়েশ্চেন করার আছে সে যেন একটু নিজেকে আনমিউট করে কোয়েশ্চেনটা করে নেয়, বা এখানে মেসেজ বক্সে লিখলেও হবে, আমি বলে দেব।
Okay. So you can either put across your question in the message box, or better still, you can unmute yourself and talk to me. I am absolutely open to any questions in any language. Okay, that includes Bengali. Please do not feel diffident that you are talking in Bengali. You can always tell me, ask me whatever you want in Bengali, right? The content is more important than the language. I hope I have been able to put across the content to you. So I am open to any kind of questions or any kind of interventions. Indeed, I am also open to any kind of objections to the way I have read the text. Because let me tell you that this is not the only way to read a text. A text survives precisely because it can be read in many different ways and often conflicting ways. So you are welcome with your intervention.
Sir, Saint John fought against the system of feudalism and gave birth to nationalism. But does the power dimension change? If so, then how?
See, the power dimension is a totally different thing. When we were talking about feudalism, we are talking about a state where you see the power is in the hands of a select few. Now, when it comes to the nation state, certainly you can say that the power is still in the hands of a select few. There can be many ways of interpreting that, but there is no gainsaying the fact, or there is no trying to wave away this fact that nationalism is certainly a great improvement on feudalism. You see, today's India, which is a nation state without any kind of zamindari system, is a much better system than what it was, when say the permanent settlement happened. Okay, if you have any idea about history, about how zamindari system came into India, how the British introduced that, all the rest of it, you will notice that we have evolved, right? Socially, we have evolved. Economically, we have evolved. Even culturally, we have evolved from the age of the zamindari system to the present idea of the nation state.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else, please? I can see a whole lot of people around here. You can speak. You are free to speak in any language you feel comfortable with.
Sir, thank you for this brilliant talk. Sir, what do you think that being a girl, Joan is more brutally treated in this male-dominated society?
That is, it is true that you can look at it that way, but I don't think when Shaw wrote this, you see, Shaw had the idea of the Superman, okay? And if you read back to Methuselah and if you read Man and Superman, you will find that Shaw looks upon or talks about women who want to be the mother of the potential Superman, okay? So this is something that he talks about. Now, to say whether Joan was more brutally treated only because she was a woman, I do not subscribe to that. Okay, I would rather say whether it was a man or woman, Joan would have been treated equally brutally. The only difference is that perhaps the fact that Joan being able to hold her own in the battle against so many people and against, this very seasoned and veteran English captains and English commandants and all that, I think that would have been looked upon in a different way. You see, the moment it's a woman, it becomes very easy to say that she's a witch. Okay. The idea of the witch is, I think, to a large extent, a patriarchal construction. When they feel powerless against a woman who defies all norms and who is able to break down the shackles of patriarchy, it is very easy to call that person a witch. Okay, I think so that is there. But when it comes to the church and things like that, you see the idea that she is talking about the emergence of a nation state, or she is talking about individual freedom, she's talking about individual choices, she's talking about personal communion with God. I think it is not so gender specific. Yes, but of course, that is also an angle. Yes. I mean, as I told you, no text has a complete closure. Okay. We can always look at it from the way you talked about. That would provide us perhaps with a totally different kind of a meaning. Okay. You are always welcome to it. You can always write it down, or, pen down your thoughts, and maybe you could send it to me or send it to any other teacher. And, you could have, productive discussions out of it.
Okay, sir. Thank you. It was really a nice talk, and we really enjoyed it.
Right. It was a pleasure to be with you all. So,
sir, one more question from Aurobindo Kundu. He asks, Joan had to go through a big span of time before getting through to civilization. Is Shaw objecting the judging system?
No, I didn't understand the question. But I think what he's trying to say is that this almost 500 years before Joan is, canonized. Is that what he's trying to say?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. See, I have a theory about this, all right? If you bear with me, I'll tell you. See, these people, this mentally excessive, I'm putting that in quotes, all right? These Shavian geniuses, right? Let's put it this way. Their IQ is much higher than the common man, okay? Now take, for instance, I'm giving a mythical kind of a state. Say in 1400, in the year 1400, the general IQ level is 10. Okay. Now, the person who asked me the question can keep his mic unmuted, please.
Yes,
the person who asked
I'm
me. Yes. Please keep yourself unmuted. Now, what I'm saying is, in the year 1400, the general IQ is 10. Right? Now, in such a situation, perhaps there is a person whose IQ is 100. Okay, IQ is 100. Fine. Now, what will happen to this person? The common people will not be able to understand him. So he will be called either, he will be called or looked upon as a lunatic, or he will be looked upon as a fool.
Yes.
Okay, so this is what is going to happen. Yes, this happened with Galileo, for instance. Galileo realized that no, the earth is moving and the sun is in the center. And people put him in the prison. So now what happens is, going back to Shaw, our civilization is progressing. So naturally, you see the general IQ level is also, I'm putting it simplistically, but mathematically it is improving. So from 10, it comes to 20, it comes to 30, it comes to 40. So maybe in 1500, our IQ is 20. In 1600, our IQ is 50. In 1800, our IQ is 90. Okay. Or whatever. In 2000, maybe our IQ is 100. Now, when we look back, we say, that man whom we poisoned or we killed or we, crucified, what he said was true. Because now we can understand him, right? Now our IQ is 100. Now we can understand that man whom we killed about 400 years ago because we didn't understand him then. So this is the perpetual, condition of our saints and martyrs. Today, when in 2020, when the general IQ level may be, say, 100, there is someone whose IQ level is 500. Now people are going to make fun of him. Maybe they won't kill him, but then he is not going to be taken seriously. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
So this is the problem with Joan. Joan was much ahead of her time. Joan's IQ was much higher than the general IQ of the people around her. Joan's IQ was higher than Earl of Warwick or Bishop Coshaw. So they do not have problem with Joan individually. Their problem with Joan is because they are short-sighted. They cannot understand what Joan is trying to say. Am I making sense?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, anybody else? Yes, if we don't have any questions, then we'll have to wrap up.
স্যার আমি মেসেজে জিজ্ঞেস করে নিলাম কারো কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন থাকলে বলতে। আমরা একটু 2 মিনিট দেখে নিচ্ছি যদি কেউ কিছু আস্ক করে।
ঠিক আছে, তারপরে তুমি ফর্মালি ক্লোজ করে দাও তাহলে। People seem to be joining right now.
Sir, it seems that আর কারো কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন নেই। তো থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার ফর দিস বিউটিফুল লেকচার।
Thank you, sir, for this amazing class on Saint John. It's really helped us.
Good. It was nice to be with you all. I hope it will help you all. Yes. And so you have a pleasant evening and stay safe. Okay. These are difficult times, right? Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir, from all of us.
Right. Thank you. So I leave the meeting.
Okay, sir.